I already have enough problem with awkward freezes for YouTube, if it's... All right, can I start? Yeah. All right, Jabbo say good morning. Let us begin. A good morning. Beginning by thanking our sponsors, Stephen, Terry Zinn, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, memory of their parents, Tzvi Hirsch ben Yosef HaKohen, Yentel Mindel Bas David Halevi Bunin Tzvi ben Chaim, and Devora Bas Yisrael Yoel. Our week of learning sponsors, Brian and Melanie Levine, in honor of the Kehila with Akara Satov for all of the Shiurim. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us all with continued opportunities to share His Torah and the Meretz Hashem to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To thank Ira Miriam Grossman for dedicating the Shiurim to the memory of Ira's father, Melvin Melech ben Azriel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamos will have an Aliyah and the families a Nechama. And Abba, with that, let us begin. So we are picking up today's daf is Samich 60, and we are picking up Meretz Hashem on Nun Tes Amud Beis 59b. And actually, let's pick up again from the two dots. We began reading the story a little bit, but let's reread it. So this is by the two dots, which are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 lines up from the bottom. Haisa Shal Rabim V'Hari Hishrab. So remember again, the Mishnah brought down a case where if you have an Ir Shal Rabim, right, or I should say the Brisa brought down the case, you have a public city, and it still has remained a public city. So what is the halacha? The halacha is that you can't go ahead and make one eruv for the entire area. So it says the Gemara, tells a story. Rabbi Zera, Arva Lamasa Debei Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Zera once made an eruv for the city of Rabbi Chia, V'lo Shavik Le'Shir, and he did not exclude anything from the eruv. So remember again, in an Ir Shal Rabim, a public city, there is a concern that the Mishnah espoused. The concern was that if you could carry throughout the entire city, people will not realize that there is a concept of Eruv, or there's a concept of Hotzah, there's a concept of carrying. You know, I was saying this with my wife reminded me that in the community that she grew up in Riverdale, New York, so Rabbi Willig, who's the Rav there, you know, for I think it was one Shabbos a year, would have the Eruv down. I don't know if the Eruv was actually down or not, to remind people of the concept of Hotzah. I don't know if they still do it there, but interestingly enough, so therefore that's the Ir Shal Rabim. That's the Ir Shal Rabim. So therefore, again, in order to remind people about the concept of Hotzah, we just simply exclude one chilik of the city from the Eruv. So it says the Gemara, so Rabbi Zera went ahead and made an Eruv for the city of Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Zera did not exclude any portion of the city from the Eruv. So Abai said to Rabbi Zera, why did you act this way? Why did you not exclude any part of the city? Sabi Dida Amrili Rav Chia bar Asi Ma'arif Kula. So again, interesting enough, Rabbi Zera said, you know, my Zayda told me that Rabbi Chia bar Asi, when he made an Eruv for this city, he enclosed the entire city. Va'amina, and I assumed based on that, Shmamina, Ir Shal Yacha V'Naseh Shal Rabim Hi. I assumed based on the fact that Rabbi Chia, in fact, made an Eruv which included the entire city, that this city must have originally been an Ir Shal Yachid, we'll call an individual city with less than 600,000, that then became an Ir Shal Rabim. So if you remember again in the Mishnah, if you have an Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim, halacha l'maisa, you can include the entire city in the Eruv. We're not concerned that people will forget about the concept of Hotzah, of the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, because people know that originally this was an Ir Shal Yachid, Amar Lei. So Abaye said, that's not what I heard. L'didi amruli hani sabi, hahi ashba havile mechad gisa. No. I heard that originally, so in other words, this is Abaye speaking now. So I heard that originally when Rabbi Chia went ahead and enclosed the entire city, that's because the city had a Rosh Hashanah, but on one end of the Rosh Hashanah was a garbage dump. It was a garbage dump. So supposed to remember again, the only time that a city becomes an Ir Shal Rabim is really again if it has 600,000, but it also has Rosh Hashanah. Now, lav dafka that the Rosh Hashanah has to go ahead and be 16 amos wide, but it does have to be open on both sides. The moment that it's not open on one side, so therefore again, so I heard that their public thoroughfare used to have a garbage dump on one side of the road, thereby closing it off. So the Gemara says, V'hashta, V'hashta the ipanyele ashpa havile kishnei psach and v'asir. And therefore I said, but now that garbage dump is no longer there, and if the garbage dump is no longer there, then ultimately again this becomes like a Rosh Hashanah that has two entrance ways, and it should be asir. In other words, asir will say that you shouldn't be able to enclose the entire city. Amar le lava datai. So we'll say very very simple. Okay, you're right. I didn't know. We'll say such a musr. Sometimes when we do something and then we're confronted by the fact that what we did was wrong. I don't mean like wrong, like illicit or legal, just incorrect. So often human nature is to dig your heels in, right? I'm not wrong. Such a musr in this. Rabbi just look, what? I made an Eruv. I didn't exclude anything because I thought things were a certain way. Now Abai, you explained to me that I was incorrect. My understanding of the history of the city was incorrect. Amoda, what a musar. Everybody's wrong at some point in time, and some of us are wrong a lot of the time. But at the end of the day, to be able to have the humility to say, if I'm wrong, okay, I'm wrong. Now let's go and correct it. Incredible. Says the Gemara. May Rabba. So let's listen to this interesting case. So Rav Ami asked the following question. Sulam mikan upesach mikan mahu. So let's listen to this interesting question. What happens if halacha l'maisa you have a Rosh Hashanah, and on one side of the Rosh Hashanah ultimately again is an entranceway, and on the other side is a ladder. So I'll say, so just to illustrate for this to you a little bit. Yeah, in other words, the picture is kind of obvious. Meaning just imagine you have Rosh Hashanah. And we'll say, watch this. On one side of the Rosh Hashanah, you have a Tzuras HaPesach, right? So you have an entranceway. The other side of the Rosh Hashanah is actually a wall, but there's a ladder that's attached to that wall on either side of the wall that allows you to easily get up and down the wall. Okay, so I'll say, remember what we've just got finished saying is if you're a Rosh Hashanah that's open on both ends, you really can't make one Eruv for the entire city. See, now the Shiloh over here is what's the definition of being open on both ends? What happens if on one end there's a wall, it's enclosed, but there's a ladder on either side of the wall? So technically speaking, the possibility for pedestrian traffic up the wall, down the wall, is very much there. Supposed to listen to this. Amar le'halchi amar Rav, this is what Rav said. Sulam, when it comes to a ladder, Toras Pesach Halav. Rav held, it's actually very interesting, Rav held that halacha l'maisa, a sulam, a ladder, has the status of an entranceway. Interesting, right? The ladder has the status of an entranceway. Rashi says over here, sulam. Rashi says, sha'olim yardin bochutz l'chomas. So you have a ladder that's specifically there to allow you to get over the wall, right? Up the wall, down the wall. Halacha l'maisa, that has the status of an entranceway. Amar Rav Nachman, lo sasitzule. So Rav Nachman said, don't listen to that. Amar Rav Ada Amar Rav, Sulam Toras Pesach Alav. So this is Rav Ada said in the name of Rav, no, that a ladder has the status of a mechitza. So the Gemara said, I'm sorry, Sulam Toras Pesach Alav, or Toras Mechitza Alav. So Rav Ada said in the name of Rav, that actually a ladder could have the status of both a mechitza, a wall, as well as an entrance. So take a look at Rashi. Toras mechitza alav kilomar eino mevatel sastima lios kepesach. So we'll say when we say that a ladder is like a wall, we'll say what does that mean? Essentially, what it means is a ladder. The presence of a ladder does not negate the presence of the wall. So, for example, so we'll say, so again, here's an nafkamina case. If you have a city, on one side there's a wall with ladders, and on the other side is an entranceway. So is that considered to be a Rosh Hashanah mefulash? Is that an open Rosh Hashanah or not? Well, it depends. If you hold that the presence of a ladder essentially creates an opening, then that Rosh Hashanah is open. But if you hold that the presence of a ladder does not negate the presence of the wall, that's what the Gemara means when it says the ladder is like a mechitza. The ladder is like a wall. So we'll say again, just when it's a ladder is like a wall, what it means is the presence of the ladder does not go ahead and negate the presence of the wall. So the Gemara said, let's analyze this. So we'll say, so according to this second version of Rav Ada's version of Rav essentially says that ladders have this duality, this dual personality. Sometimes they can operate as an entranceway, and sometimes they operate as a wall. Torah's mechitza love. When we say that a ladder operates as a wall, kida amron. So we'll say that's what we said before. In other words, the Gemara is suggesting when that's the case that we're asking about, when you have a surabim that's open on one side and a wall with ladders on the other side, the question is predicated on the possibility that a ladder operates as a mechitza. Torah's Pesach halav. When do you see that a ladder could operate as an opening, as an entranceway? Besulam shebein shtei chatzeros. Both say this is actually an interesting case. So imagine for a moment you have a home, you have two chatzeros, two courtyards. There's a wall in between the two courtyards, but there are ladders on either side of the wall. So we'll say, so generally, when there's a wall between two chatzeros, so halacha l'maisa, that ladder would prevent the two chatzeros from, that wall would prevent the two chatzeros from entering into an eruv with each other. So I say, so the shaila is over here. In this case, you have ladders as well. So what's talacha? So the Gemara says, Ratzu echad ma'ariv, Ratzu shnayim ma'arvin. Supposed to say, very interesting, the presence of the ladders along the walls of the wall between the two chatzeros essentially says as follows. If the two chatzeros want to treat themselves as two distinct areas with two distinct Eruvin, then that works. But halacha l'maaseh, if they choose to join into one Eruv, that works as well. So it says the Gemara, so what does that show you? That shows you that a ladder could operate, in fact, as an entranceway. Umi amar Rav Nachman hachi. Did Rav Nachman really say this? Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Anshe Chatzir va'anshe mirpases sheshachahu. So both, this is an interesting case. So you have people who live in a chatzar and people who live on a mirpaset. So we'll say, so actually, interestingly enough, this is kind of exactly what it sounds like. If you could, I'm sorry? Thank you, Mashi. So this would be picture 222. If you're looking on the WhatsApp, Mashi just sent it out on the chat. So this is picture 222. So you can see Rabbi says, so you have a chatzar, and then you have a mirpaset. Quite literally. I see, Michael Langbaum, Jerry Wolaski look like they're both sitting on their mirpasets in Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, zachisan. So says the Gemara. So that's the case over here. So you have a chatzar, and then you have a home in the chatzar. The home in the chatzar has two stories. The mirpaset is the terrace of the upper story. So as you can see at picture 222, you have a ladder which extends from the chatzar to the mirpaset. So it says the Gemara, V'amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Anshe chatzar v'anshe mirpases sheshachachu v'lo tap of samech v'lo irvu. So as I say, ideally, the people of the chatzar and the people of the mirpaset would join into one eruv. What happens if they didn't? They didn't join into one eruv. So what happens then? Im yesh lifnehem daka arba'a ina oseres. Well, listen to this. If at the entrance of the ladder, someone constructed a small little doorway. Rashi says over here, daka pesach katan gova arba. If there's a small doorway, even just 4 tfachim, in front of the ladder, then halacha l'maisa ina oseres. If there's a small doorway in front of the ladder, I will say, indicating that the mirpaset is really a rishus, it's really a domain unto itself, then the failure of the mirpaset and the chatzar to join in a joint eruv does not preclude carrying in either of them. Ve'im lav, but if halacha l'maisa, there was no doorway constructed in front of the mirpaset, then halacha l'maisa, they're one area, and if they're one area, failure to join in a common eruv will prohibit carrying. So I'll say, so what do you see from here? Look at Rashi, lav oseres, alma toras pasach halav, bafilu chumra. So we'll say, you see from here that halacha l'maisa, a ladder really has the status of an entranceway. Because we'll see what it's saying is like this, the presence of the ladder essentially creates an entranceway between the chatzir and the mirpaset. So therefore, ideally, they're supposed to join in one eruv. The only exception is if they constructed a doorway around the base of the ladder, essentially making the mirpaset like its own domain, then they need not join into one eruv. But in the absence of that daka, that little doorway, halacha l'maaseh is supposed to join into one eruv, which shows you that what? That a ladder has the status of an entranceway. Hacham askinon, what's the case over here? Bidalo gavah mirpaset asara. But it's actually talking about a terrace, a mirpaset that is not more than 10 tfachim high. If it's not more than 10 tfachim high, we'll say then what? Then it's actually part of the ground of the chatzar. V'i lo gava mirpeset asara kika avidaka mai havi. But I don't understand. If the mirpeset is not more than 10 tefachim high, then what does the creation of an entranceway around the base of the ladder do? To which the Gemara says, what's the case? The Gemara says, b'migufefes. Oh, both say, what's the case here? The case here, and this is picture 223. The case is where the mirpeset is actually enclosed. So even though the height of the mirpeset is less than 10 tefachim, halacha l'maisa, the mirpeset is actually enclosed. But watch this, says the Gemara, megufefes ad asara amos, and then there is a breach in the fencing, but the breach is less than 10 amos. The chayvan da avid daka istaluke istalik lemehacha. The creation of the daka, the Kisabos say so. Once it's less than 10 tefachim, but it's totally enclosed. There's a breach in the enclosure. The breach is less than 10 amos. The presence of the daka, of the little entranceway by the base of the ladder, essentially renders the mirpeset a separate domain, in which case it would not need to join into an eruv together with the chatzar. But halacha l'maaseh, the absence of the daka ultimately again would require them to enter into a joint eruv. Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Kosel, so we'll say so fine. So therefore, what we're beginning to see over here is as follows. We have fundamental machlokes about the status of a ladder. So in the first version of Rav, Rav said that a ladder is treated like an entranceway. Rav Ada's version of Rav is essentially saying that a ladder has this split personality. Sometimes it's like an entranceway, and sometimes it is like a mechitza. Sometimes it's like a wall. So another ladder case. I'm Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Kosel sheratzva bisulamos. We'll say, what happens if you have a wall? What happens if you have a wall? And halacha l'maisa, you went ahead and you literally had ladders all across the wall. Ladders all across. It's not just one ladder, multiple ladders all across the wall. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? Afilu biyaser me'aser, toras mechitza alav. Even if halacha l'maisa, here you can see this is picture 224. This is picture 224. So again, about so you can see in this case over here, it's not just one ladder, but again, multiple ladders lined up by one another across the wall. So the Gemara says, "Filu biyaser me'aser toras mechitza alav." In this case, I will say halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, it has a toras mechitza. In other words, I will say that halacha l'maisa, we don't treat this as if the wall has been breached, but rather, again, the presence of the ladders does not negate the fact that there is a wall dividing between these two reshuyos. So it says the Gemara. So look at Rashi. Toras mechitza alav ve'im mevatlan mechitza mehavi kinefrat sakosa yoser me'aser darminu lekaman ma'arvin echad ve'im ma'arvin shnayim elo ratzu echad ma'arvin ulekula. So we'll say the idea over here is, you see, the reason Gemara is quoting this is that halacha l'maisa, according to this opinion, the presence of the ladders, even multiple ladders, does not negate the presence of the wall. Rami li Rabban Rav Yehuda b'matzarta debei Rav Chanina. So Rav Barona raised the question to Rav Yehuda in the wine press of Rav Chanina. Mi amar Shmuel toras mechitza alav. Does Shmuel really hold that a ladder has the status of a mechitza, or like better, so like we said before, that the presence of the ladder does not negate the wall? V'hamar Rav Nachman amar Shmuel anshe mirpases v'anshe chazer sheshachu v'lo irvu. If you have people who live, we'll say, going back to the same case before, you have people who live in the mirpases, right, and people who live in the chazer, sheshachu v'lo irvu. Ideally, they meant to join in one eruv, but they didn't do so. Im yesh lefaneha daka arba inas oseres. If there is a small doorway, a small entranceway of even 4 tefachim, ultimately by the base of the ladder, so then failure to enter into an eruv with each other does not prevent either rishus from carrying, because the presence of the small doorway essentially renders the mirpasas its own rishus. Ve'im lav, but if there's no daka, oseres, then failure to join in one joint eruv will prohibit carrying one upon the other. So we'll say, so what do you see from there? You see from there that halacha l'maisa, a ladder doesn't have the status of a mechitza, but rather a ladder has the status of a pesach, of an entranceway. First wide line, Samech Hamad Aleph. Hachamayaskinon. What's the case here? Hachamayaskinon. Delo gava mirpases asara. But also the case we're dealing with over here is that the mirpases is not 10 tefachim tall. It's less than 10 tefachim. If you look over merpes asar ki avadaka my havi, but also just like we said before, but if the merpes is not 10 tefachim tall, and therefore effectively, just like the chutzar, then halacha lamaisa again. What does it matter if you're making this doorway or not? If it's less than 10 tefachim tall, by definition, it's part of the chutzar, to which the Gemara says b'megufefes. We're talking about again an enclosed merpeses ad eser amos with a breach of up to 10 amos. The chayvan the avid nako istaluki istalik mihacha. Since they went ahead and they enclosed it, since when they made that little doorway, the presence of the doorway by the entrance of the ladder essentially removes the reshus of the merpeses, ultimately from the chatzar. Okay, but it's an interesting story. Hano be kakunoi the asil kamed Rav Yosef. Listen to this. So the people of Kakunoi came before Rav Yosef. Amrulei havlon gabra deli arav lon masin. Can you send someone from your base medrash who can make an eruv in our community of Kakunoi? Amrulei labai. So Rav Yosef said to Abai, Zil arevlu. Do me a favor. I'm dispatching you. I'm sending you out to Kakunoi. Go make an eruv in Kakunoi. Well, listen to the instructions that Rav Yosef gave to Abai. V'chazi telamitzavcha alav b'bei midrash. Also, listen to this. But make sure no one complains about your eruv in the base medrash. So, see what's happening over here? Rav Yossi says to Abaye, listen, I want to make sure that everyone holds by your eruv. See what I say? Isn't this great? See, the discussion of I don't hold of the eruv, right, is not a new one. It's not a new one. This has been part of the Jewish people for a very long time. So Rav Yosef says to Abaye, make an eruv that everybody holds by. I don't want it to be that in the base medrash I'm going to hear, this one does hold to the eruv, this one doesn't hold to the eruv, none of that. So say Sabai goes to Kakunoi. Listen to this. Azal, chazal ahun basi de psichi lenara. So we'll say, so remember again. So Kakunoi was in Ir Shal Rabim. So therefore Abai understood that Rabbi says the halal as the Mishnah taught us, that Allah Chalmais, you have to exclude a part of the city from the Eruv, right? Whenever you have an Ir Shal Rabim, you have to exclude a part of the city. So Abai is looking for what area can he exclude. So what happened? He saw Chazalahano Bati de Psichi Lenara. He saw these homes that opened to the river. Now we'll say it was riverfront property. But halacha lemaisa again, it only had an entranceway to the river, had no entranceway to the rest of the city. So the Gemara says, Amar Hani lehavi shir lemasu. He said, okay, you know what? We'll take this row of homes, this row of waterfront property, and halacha lemaisa will make this the excluded part of the city. Hadar Amar ein ma'arvenes kulatan. Then he thought to himself, you know, the Mishnah says that if you have an Ir Shal Rabim, you cannot include the entire city in the Eruv. Michlal di'iboi le'eruve matzi ma'arvi. Now we'll say, now what it sounds like is that halacha l'maisa, if you wanted to include the entire city in the Eruv, you could, you're just not allowed to. So the Rebbe said, so what was the problem? The problem is these homes in general, because they did not open up into the city, could not really be included in the Eruv as well. So what Abai was clearing was like this. I have to leave out part of the city, but from the Mishnah's wording, it sounds like the shear, the part that is excluded, has to be something that technically could have been included, but Radafka excluding it. These waterfront homes, the truth is, could have never been included in the Eruv of the city. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, there's no entranceway to the city. Their entranceway faces the water. So maybe, therefore, because they couldn't technically be included in the Eruv, therefore what? They can't count as the excluded area. So the Gemara says, Ella i'avedlu kavi di'boile eruve derech lomas matzar. So I said, you know what? No problem. I'll just make windows in these waterfront homes. We'll carve out some windows. That way, again, the window kind of acts as an entrance to the city as well. And then we could use this row of waterfront property as the excluded area. Then he said to himself, Hadar Amar lo boy. Then he said, no, I don't think I need to make windows in order to make them the excluded area. The Rabba Baravua ma'ariv lo lekula mechuza arsiyasa mishum pera de beituri. The chol chad v'chad havishir lechavrei. The afal gav di boy la ruva v'hadi adadi lo matziyam. So we actually had this case. This is the picture in Rashi. If you see, Rabba Baravua Bosai went ahead and in the city of Mechuzah, they had this very interesting setup. You had multiple mavuos, each of those rows in Rashi. is a mavui, and again, I'm sure you have a picture, and actually there is no picture of this in the back, in the pictures, but you have it over here in Rashi. Each of these rows consists of multiple mavuis, chaseros and mavuis. Those middle rows, which are technically Rosh Hashanah, had these large trenches, into which people would throw date pits, which were used as like a trough for communal animals. So we'll say, so what ended up happening over here is Rabbi Bar Avua would go ahead and make a separate Eruv for each row. Now this was an Ir Shal Rabim, but he would make a separate Eruv for each row. And I will say the way it worked is so let's say there's rows A, B, and C. He'd make an Eruv for A, an Eruv for B, an Eruv for C. But because this is an Ir Shal Rabim, you have to exclude something, it's no problem. B was considered to be the excluded area for A. C was considered to be the excluded area for B. A was considered to be the excluded area for B. And B was considered to be the excluded area for C. So on and so forth. So you see from here that halacha, and I will say, now I want to point out, there was no possibility for making one comprehensive Eruv for the city of Mechuzah. So you see from here, I will say, that's what? That halacha l'maisa, to exclude something from the Eruv of the city does not necessarily mean that that area could have been included. In other words, something could serve as the exclusion, even if halacha l'maisa technically it could not have been included. So the Gemara says, Hadam, then Abai said to himself, no. Lo dami, hasam ibai la'aruve derech gagos, v'hani lo ma'arvi. So Abai said, but here's a difference. In Mechuzah, actually, technically, you could have made a joint area for the city. How? Because they'll say apparently in between rows A, B, and C there were connected rooftops. So you could have made an area vis-a-vis the connected rooftops. Here, with the waterfront property without the windows, there really is no way to include these homes in the Eruv. Hilchach na'avdin kavi. Therefore, Abai goes back to his original idea. You know what? Let's just make windows. Let's make windows. If I make windows on the side of the homes, riverfront homes, facing the city, they could join the city through those windows in Shalom al Yisrael. Hadar Amar, Kavi Nami Lobai. Then he says, no, I don't need to make the windows. I'll tell you why. Dahu Beitivna Dahavile Lamar Bar Pupidasa, Mi Pumpadisa, Vishavi Yeshila Pumpadisa. But there was this, in Pumpadisa, Somar had this storehouse, a storehouse for straw. And say, obviously, again, that did not have an entranceway to the city, yet again, it was used as the excluded area for Pumpadisa. Rashi says over here, Dahave Beitivna, it's the fourth wide line in Rashi, Varmina Lekaman Alachem B'Shem, the low boy nun dir l'shir. So I'll say, so here's an example of using even a non-domicile area, ultimately again, as an excluded area. So you see from here that in order to go ahead and be excluded from the Eruv, you need not to be something which could be included in the Eruv. You don't even really have to be a domicile. So therefore, again, I could certainly use these riverfront homes, and I don't have to start the construction project of making windows that face the city. To which the Gemara says, Amar Hainu. So we'll say, so listen to this. So you see, Abaye is going back and forth. Now, it sounds like at the end of the day, what happened is Abaye he made the Eruv. He used the waterfront homes as the shear, as the excluded area from the Eruv. He did not make windows in it because halacha l'maisa, it wasn't, as already said to himself, Amar Hainu da Amar Limar Chazid lo mitzav chalei b'vei midrash. So Abaye says, now I know what Rav Yosef meant when he told me, make an Eruv that no one's going to complain about in the base medrash. So I realized that this is actually quite complicated. And I think the bottom line, the unwritten part of the story is someone definitely complained. Right? So someone definitely did not hold of the Eruv, but at least fascinatingly enough, you see the process that Abaye went through. So the Gemara goes right there. So remember again, if you are making an Eruv and a Ir Shal Rabim, you have to exclude some area. Now the Mishnah said you have to exclude the area Ki'ir Chadasha. We'll say now Chadasha doesn't literally mean like a new city. That's how we read it in the Mishnah. But this is actually the name of a city. Chadasha was a city in Yehuda that had 50 residents. So Tanya Amar Yehuda Ir Achas Haisa Yehuda v'Chadasha Shmo. It says there was a city in Yehuda and its name was Chadasha v'Hayu Ba Nun Diyurim. And there were 50 residents who lived there. Anoshim, Noshim, Etaf, men, women, and children. And I will say, so there was nothing unique about Chadasha except that it became like the paradigmatic, example of a self-contained small entity. And therefore, Chazal just used it as an example that if you are making an Eruv in a Ir Shal Rabim, you have to leave out an area. How much of an area? Like the city of Chadasha, meaning 50 residents. Ibailuhu, Chadasha Mahu. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what about Chadasha itself? Or what the Gemara is asking over here is as follows. Look at Rashi. Chadasha Mahu, Leiruve be'anpe nafsha kula below shir. Let's say you want to make an Eruv for the city of Chadasha. Does Chadasha itself require an excluded area or not? Chadasha, the Gemara says, Chadasha ki echidihu hav yashir l'gdola, gdola nami hav yashir l'ktana. So we'll say, well, Chadasha, the same way that ultimately, again, that Chadasha would be the excluded area for a larger city, so too, again, a larger city can be the excluded area for the smallest city. So we just saw this before. This was the case of Mechuzah, that you could have a situation when you have distinct areas that each area could be a shear for the other. Ela ke'ein chadasha mahu. Rather, what the Gemara is asking is not Chadasha itself, but rather if you have a city like Chadasha. Rashi says, Ke'ein Chadasha, Ir ketana acher shel nun diurin ve'ein smucha l'gdola. So it says, obviously, if you have like the city of Chadasha, which is next to a larger city, then obviously when you make an Eruv in Chadasha, the larger city is considered to be the excluded part. Just like when you make the Eruv in the larger city, Chadasha is considered to be the excluded part. But what happens if you have a standalone city like Chadasha, a small little city like Chadasha? You want to make an Eruv around it. Is there an obligation to go ahead and exclude some area? So the Gemara says, Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, Chad Amar Ba Yishir. One opinion said that you require to exclude some area. V'Chad Amar Lo Ba Yishir. And what's the other opinion said that Halacha L'Maisa, you are not obligated to leave out any amount. So Machlokes. Reb Shimon Amar Gimel Chatzeros. Well, remember again, Reb Shimon disagreed in the Mishnah, and he said that Halacha L'Maisa, you have to go ahead and exclude Gimel Chatzeros Shal Shnei Batim. 3 Chatzeros, right? You have to exclude an area of 3 Chatzeros with at least 2 homes in each Chatzer. So it says the Gemara, Reb Shimon Amar Gimel Chatzeros Amar Chabar Goria Amarav Halacha Reb Shimon. So again, we'll say one opinion says, Rav says, Halacha follows Reb Shimon. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Afilu Bayis Echad V'Chatzer Achas. Rabbi Yitzchak says all you need to really leave out is even 1 home or 1 Chatzer. Chatzer Achas Hakataytcha, 1 Chatzer. We'll say now that sounds like 1 Chatzer even if it doesn't have a home. Elaima Bayis Echad B'Chatzer Achas. Rather, again, we'll say what Rabbi Yitzchak was saying is that Halacha L'Maisa, even 1 home and 1 Chatzer is enough of a shear. Amar Le'abai Rabbi Yosef Had Rabbi Yitzchak Gemara Usvara. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak said, that Halacha L'Maisa, 1 house and even just 1 house and 1 Chazar, that's enough of an exclusion. Tell me, is that a Gemara? Is that a tradition he received? Or is that a Silara? Is that a logical argument, a logical position that he came up with? Supposed to listen to this. Says Abai speaking to Rav Yosef. Remember again, same Rebbe Talmud relationship. We saw Rav Yosef got the call to establish the Eruv in Kukiani, right? So ultimately, again, Abai, he sent his Talmud Abaye. So now Abai is asking Rav Yosef, Rebbe, tell me, Rabbi Yitzchak Shita of 1 Chatzer, 1 home, is that a Svara or is that a Gemara? So Amrale, my nafka l'chamina, my lafka l'mina. So Abai says, so Rav Yosef back to Abai, what does it matter? That's his position. Amrale Gemara Gamor Zamorta Tehei. So he says, listen to this. Abai says back to his Rebbe, if it's a tradition that I want to learn, should I make it like a song? Which I will say is a phrase you find very often when people want to be exact with their learning. The idea being that halacha l'maisa, what Abai was saying was, it's important to be precise in the transmission of knowledge. So it's not enough to know Rav Yitzchak's position, but halacha l'maisa, again, halacha l'maisa, is it a svara? Is it a gemara? And Abai was saying that because, we'll say Torah is not a song. Meaning that a song, if you don't know all the lyrics, you could fake it a little bit. But Lamaisa, when it comes to Torah, there must be precision in your knowledge. Mishnah. So let's listen to this. Someone was standing in the east, and he said to his son, make for me an Eruv in the west. B'marav, or a person was standing in the west. Va'amar Lebno, and he said to his son, Ariv li b'mizrach, make for me an Eruv in the east. So we'll say, let's say now the son puts down the Eruv. So if there's 2,000 amas between the individual, ultimately again, and his home, but more than 2,000 amas from his present position to his Eruv, mutter lebeso va'asr le'eruvo. So we'll say makes sense, right? So again, obviously I asked my son to put an eruv in the east, right? So if there's more than 2,000 amos, if there's 2,000 amos between me and my home, I can go to my home. If there's more than 2,000 amos between me and my eruv, I can't get to my eruv. So the Gemara says, "Va'asr le'eruvo, le'eruva apayim amo lebeso yasamikan." But if there's 2,000 amos between me and my present position and my eruv, I can go to my eruv. But if there's more than 2,000 amos between me and my home, asr lebeso mutar le'eruvo. Good. So we'll say we'll define that case in the Gemara. Hanosein es eruva be'ibura shlier. So if a person puts his eruv, we'll say in the boundary of the city. So remember again, we've spoken about this before. The iburo shlier is the 70 2/3 amma extension that every city has. So if you put your eruv in that 70 2/3 extension, the Mishnah says lo asav lo klum. You haven't done anything. Now, why haven't you done anything? Because remember, the tchum itself is measured from where? From the edge of that 70 2/3 amas. So you haven't done anything by putting an eruv inside of that extension. Nas nechutz letchum. However, if you went ahead and you put your eruv outside of your tchum, we'll see what that means. Afilu ama achos, even one ama, amad beis, masheniskar hu mafsid. We'll say, so we'll see exactly what this means, but by Pashtus, what it means is what you gain in one direction, you lose in the other direction. So we'll say, let's analyze the first case. Kasaka daitcha. Lemizrach beis, or lemira beis. Supposed to listen to this. So remember, first case of the Mishnah was, I'm standing in the east, and I say to my son, make for me an eruv to the west. And he makes an eruv for me. So we'll say, or vice versa. So we'll say, so now what the Mishnah teaches me is like this. At the point that Shabbos starts, if I'm within 2,000 amas of my home, I can get to my home. If I'm within 2,000, but more than 2,000 amas from my eruv, I can't get to my eruv. Conversely, if I'm 2,000 amos from my eruv, I can get to my eruv. But if I'm more than 2,000 amos from my home, I can't get to my home. So it says the Gemara, Kasaka daitcha lemizrach, the mizrach beiso, or lemira beiso. So we'll say, we assume the Mishnah means as follows, that when the individual is standing in the east, it means to the east of his home. And when it means to the west, he's standing to the west of his home. Or as I will say, that halacha lamaisa, what we assume is happening over here is that I am standing to the east or to the west of my home. So my home is in front of me, and I'm asking my son to do what? To place the eruv somewhere past my home. If you want to see, this is picture 225. 225. So 225, Rabbi say, is the way B'pashtos we understand the Mishnah. That's what we're assuming is the case of the Mishnah. 225, 226. So we'll say, so now watch this. Says the Gemara, so bishlama heimenu ula beiso apayim amo. So if you say that halacha lamaisa, so from me to my home is 2,000 amos. Eruva yoser mikan, but to my eruv is more than 2,000 amos. Meshkachas la dimati lebeise v'lo mati leeruvo. So we'll say, so again, that's picture 225. I'm within 2,000 amos of my home, but my eruv is past my home, and therefore I can't really get to my eruv. Ela heimenu ula eruvo apayim amo. But I will say, what's the case of where I'm 2,000 amas, within 2,000 amas from my eruv, but more than 2,000 amas from my home? What case is that? Rabbi Yitzchak, misavis lemizrach beso, lemayrav beso, lo lemizrach beno, Ulamayrav beno. So supposed to listen to this. So therefore, again, Rabbi Yitzchak says, no. The directions mentioned in the Mishnah Abosai are not directions mentioned vis-a-vis my home, but rather directions mentioned vis-a-vis my son. So vis-a-vis my son. So I'm to the east of my son, to the west of my son, and I tell him, go ahead and place the eruv, to the west or to the east. So then I will say again, my orientation towards my home and towards my eruv could be in two different ways. However, Rav Shilam, no. I feel mizrach beno or l'mayrav beso. So I'm sorry, beso, not beno. So I'll say, so Rav says, no. Let's understand it ultimately again as we read the Mishnah originally. When it says that I am standing in the east, it doesn't mean to the east of my son or to the west of my son, but rather again, it's talking about my directional orientation vis-a-vis my home. I suppose to say, I don't understand, how could I have a case where I am within 2,000 amas of my eruv, but not 2,000 amas of my home? Again, the picture we have in our mind is like 225. That Allah Chalamai, so we're always focusing past. We're always focusing past the home. To which the Gemara says, Kigon, Dikai Beisa Ba'alachsuna. Oh, I will say, what's the case? See, we're assuming that we're dealing in a linear case, where my home is in front of me, my Eruv is in front of me. Therefore, I can't imagine a case where halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, I'm hitting my Eruv before I hit my home. But what's the case? The case is where everything is at a diagonal. Everything is at a diagonal. So we'll say that's picture 227. So if you can imagine, again, I'm standing at a diagonal to my home, a diagonal to my Eruv. And I'm telling my child, I'm telling my son to place my Eruv for me. So what happens over here? So halacha l'maisa, you could have a case where sometimes the home is within 2,000 amas, sometimes the Eruv is within 2,000 amas. So therefore the Mishnah is telling me, in this case of the diagonal, if my home was within 2,000 amas, but my Eruv is further than 2,000 amas, I can go home, can't access my Eruv. Or if my Eruv is within 2,000 amas, but my home is past 2,000 amas, I can access my Eruv, but I can't access my home. That's the case of the diagonal. Good. So let's go right there. Says the Gemara, no sin Eruv b'sochi bura. So I'll say if a person goes ahead and places his Eruv out, remember again, so Mishnah said if a person places in his Eruv inside of the Ibur, right? The Ibur is at 70 and 2/3 amas, lo asav lo klum. He hasn't done anything, which makes sense because at the end of the day, your tchum anyway is measured by the edge of that 70 and 2/3 amas. But then it said about something very interesting. But then it said that if halacha l'maisa nasno chutz l'tchum, if you placed your Eruv outside of the tchum, even one amma, what you get on one side, you lose on the other side. So the Gemara says, chutz l'tchum, are you putting your Eruv outside of the tchum? Also, you're not allowed to put your Eruv outside of your tchum. Right? If you put your Eruv outside of your tchum, that's an illegal Eruv. Ela ema chutz le'ibura. Rather, we'll say what it means is outside of the Ibur. So we'll say what it's saying is like this, that halacha l'maisa, the way Eruv would work, is that in the event that you go ahead and you place your Eruv somewhere like right by the edge of that 70 and 2/3 amas, or even right outside of that Ibur, that could work. But outside of the Tchum, we'll say, so in other words, remember again, the Tchum is measured from the edge of the extension, 70 and 2/3 extension. You have 2,000 amas from there. You could effectively place your Eruv anywhere within those 2,000 amas. That's what extends your Eruv out. So if you place your Eruv inside of the Ibor, inside of the 70 and 2/3 extension, you've gained nothing. But if you place your Eruv outside of the 70 and 2/3 extension, as long as you're within 2,000 amas from the 70 and 2/3 extension, that's how you gain area with your Eruv Tchum. So we'll stop over here. We'll pick up at Meretz Hashem at the 2 dots tomorrow. Shkoyach.